Before everything went wrong, Jessica and I were inseparable. I still remember the day we met like it was yesterday. It was a crisp morning outside the base, and I had just finished a long run with the other recruits. My muscles ached, but my spirits were high. Fresh out of boot camp, I was still full of optimism. I was part of something bigger now, a mission, a purpose. But on that day, as I entered the small cafe just outside the base, I found something I hadn't been expecting. She was sitting alone by the window, her dark hair falling in loose waves over her shoulder, a nursing textbook open in front of her. Jessica. I had no idea she was about to change my life. I ordered a coffee and sat across the room, stealing glances at her between sips. She had this radiant smile, the kind that brightens an entire room, and when our eyes met, my heart skipped a beat. I'm not one for hesitation, so I got up, walked over, and introduced myself. "Hey, mind if I sit here?" I asked, pointing at the chair across from her. "I'm David." She looked up from her book, surprised but not annoyed. "I'm Jessica," she replied, a soft smile tugging at her lips. That's how it started. We talked for hours about everything, her passion for helping people, my dreams of making a difference. There was an instant connection, something deep and unspoken. We both felt it. We met again the next day, and the day after that. Soon, every spare moment I had, I was with her. It was fast, yes, but it was real. I knew I was falling in love. The military life wasn't easy on relationships, but Jessica understood. She supported me through the grueling training, the long hours, and the uncertainty of deployments. She was my rock, my reason to keep going. No matter how tough things got, I always had her waiting for me, and that gave me strength. When I wasn't training, we were inseparable. We'd spend weekends driving out to the coast, watching the sunset from the hood of my old truck, talking about the future. We imagined a life together, a house, kids, a family. It felt like we could conquer anything as long as we had each other. When I asked her to marry me, she didn't hesitate. We had a small ceremony before my first deployment. It was simple, just us and a few friends, but it was perfect. I thought nothing could tear us apart. Our love felt bulletproof. The deployment was tough, but we made it through. We wrote letters to each other constantly. Her letters kept me sane during those long nights in the desert. I'd sit in my tent, reading her words over and over, imagining her smile, her laugh. We talked about the future, about the children we would have, the life we would build together when I came home. But then, things changed. The mission that altered everything came without much warning. My unit was called for an emergency extraction deep in enemy territory. Hostages had been taken, civilians caught in the middle of a bloody civil war. The objective was simple: get in, retrieve the hostages, and get out. But no mission ever goes as planned. The first sign that something was wrong came when we were briefed on the hostages. They were mostly aid workers, volunteers who had been trying to help the locals. But then I heard her name, Jessica. My blood turned to ice. My heart hammered in my chest as I tried to comprehend what I had just heard. She had been working with an international medical organization, volunteering to help civilians trapped in the war zone. I hadn't known she had gone so deep into the conflict. She never told me. My stomach clenched with fear as the reality set in. My wife, the woman I had married, the woman I loved, was in the hands of terrorists. I couldn't think straight. My commanding officer's voice became a blur as he outlined the mission. The only thing that mattered was getting her out. When we deployed, every second felt like an eternity. The closer we got to the target, the more intense the fighting became. We were taking heavy fire from the moment we landed. Bullets zipped past us, and the air was thick with smoke and chaos. My mind was focused on one thing: Jessica. We pushed forward, fighting our way through the enemy lines. Men I had trained with, men I considered brothers, fell beside me. Larry, my closest friend in the unit, was hit in the chest as we breached the compound. He dropped to the ground, blood pouring from the wound, his eyes wide in shock. "David," he gasped, reaching for me, but there was nothing I could do. The gunfire was too intense, and I was forced to leave him behind. The pain of that decision still haunts me. As we entered the compound, the smell of gunpowder filled the air. I moved like a machine, driven by a singular purpose: The world around me seemed to fade as I kicked down doors, clearing rooms with precision. My heart pounded in my chest as I shouted Jessica's name over the chaos. Then finally I saw her. She was huddled in a corner of a dark room, her arms wrapped around her knees. Her face was bruised, and her eyes were wide with fear. The moment our eyes met, everything else disappeared. I rushed to her, pulling her into my arms. She clung to me, trembling, and I held her as tightly as I could. "David," she whispered, her voice weak. "You came. I'll always come for you," I whispered back, my voice shaking. "I'm getting you out of here." We fought our way out, Jessica in tow. The enemy forces closed in around us, but I didn't care. I was ready to lay down my life if it meant getting her out. We reached the extraction point, and as the helicopter lifted off, I watched the compound below disappear into the horizon. But the cost was heavy. Larry and nearly every man in my unit was dead. I was the only survivor, left standing amidst the wreckage of what had once been my comrades, my brothers. The weight of their deaths crushed me. I had saved Jessica, but at what cost? When we got home, I thought we'd heal together. I thought the bond we had would grow stronger after everything we had been through. But something was different. Jessica had changed. At first, I chalked it up to trauma. After all, she had been through hell. But as time went on, I realized it wasn't just the trauma. She had become distant, withdrawn. The woman I had fought so hard to save was slipping away from me, and I didn't know how to stop it. I tried to fix things. I focused on rebuilding our lives, thinking that once we settled back into normalcy, everything would be okay. When our son Luke was born, I thought it would be the fresh start we needed. I thought it would bring us closer. But it didn't. Jessica's distance grew. She seemed uninterested in our son, in our family. The connection we once had felt strained, like we were living in different worlds. I tried to understand, tried to be patient, but no matter what I did, I couldn't bring her back to me. I blamed myself. Maybe if I had been home more, maybe if I had tried harder, maybe if I hadn't left for another deployment so soon after the rescue. The guilt ate away at me. But the truth was, the Jessica I had married, the woman I had fought so hard to save, was gone. When I left for my next deployment, I had no idea how far apart we had drifted. I had no idea how much she had changed, how much she had hidden from me. It wasn't just the distance. It was betrayal. And when I returned home, everything I thought I knew about her, about us, would be shattered beyond repair. 9 months. It had been 9 long months since I'd seen my family, and every day away from Jessica and Luke felt like an eternity. My deployment had been grueling, but knowing I had them waiting for me kept me going through the worst of it. I missed the warmth of home, the smell of Jessica's perfume, the sound of Luke's laughter, the feeling of normal life. I couldn't wait to surprise them. Coming home earlier than expected was supposed to be a gift, a moment of joy. I had no idea what I was walking into. The afternoon sun was high in the sky when I pulled up to our house. The sight of it should have filled me with relief, but something felt off. I shrugged it off as nerves, chalking it up to the months I'd been away. Maybe I was just anxious to see them. That's all. My hand gripped the strap of my duffel bag a little tighter as I approached the front door, the excitement building in my chest. I rang the doorbell, expecting to see Jessica's face light up, her arms flying around me in surprise. I imagined Luke running up behind her, screaming "Daddy," with that toothy grin of his. Instead, I heard slow, heavy footsteps on the other side. The door creaked open, and my smile faltered. Standing in the doorway was not my wife. Instead, a shirtless, muscular guy stood there, glaring at me as if I was the intruder. His hair was wet, and a tattoo snaked across his chest. His eyes were cold, filled with an arrogance that sent a wave of unease through me. "Who the fuck are you?" he spat, his voice filled with disdain as he leaned against the doorframe, blocking my way. I blinked, taken aback. I'm David. This is my house," I said, the words feeling strange as they left my mouth. The man scoffed, giving me a once-over like I didn't belong. "Your house? Not anymore, man." Before I could even process the absurdity of his words, I saw movement behind him. Jessica stepped into view, wearing nothing but a thin sheet that clung to her skin. Her hair was tousled, and her face flushed as though she'd just woken up. But what struck me most was the look in her eyes, shock, followed by annoyance. "David," she said, her voice laced with irritation, like my presence was some sort of inconvenience. "What the fuck are you doing here? You weren't supposed to come back yet." I stared at her, my mind trying to catch up with what was happening. "Jessica, what's going on? Who is this guy?" My voice was shaking, the shock creeping in. "And where's Luke?" Her reaction was like a slap in the face. She rolled her eyes, stepping forward as if the whole situation was no big deal. "Look, David, you weren't here. I got lonely, okay? What did you expect me to do? Wait around forever?" The way she said it, so casual, so dismissive, made my stomach twist. "I've been gone for 9 months. 9 months, Jess. We're a family." I couldn't even finish the sentence. I glanced at the man who stood there, arms crossed, smirking like he owned the place. "Who is this? What the hell is going on?" The guy chuckled darkly, but Jessica held up a hand, silencing him. She shrugged as if none of this mattered. "This is Ryan. He's been keeping me company while you've been busy," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You didn't really expect me to just sit here and wait for you, did you?" I felt the blood drain from my face. "Jessica, we have a son. We're married. How could you?" At the mention of Luke, her expression shifted. A smirk curled on her lips, and she glanced back at Ryan, who let out a low laugh. "Luke," she said, her tone mocking. "Oh, he's not here anymore?" The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What do you mean he's not here? Where is he, Jessica? Where's our son?" Ryan stepped forward, enjoying every second of my confusion. "Yeah, about that. I don't really like that little brat," he said with a grin. "So, we took care of it?" "Took care of it?" I echoed, my voice barely more than a whisper. Panic surged through me, and I pushed past Ryan, searching the house for any sign of Luke. His toys were gone. His room was stripped bare, like he'd never lived there at all. "Jessica, where is he?" I shouted, the desperation clawing at my throat. She followed me slowly, her arms still wrapped around the sheet. "We gave him up for adoption," she said flatly, as if she were talking about an old piece of furniture. "He wasn't part of the life I wanted anymore. Sorry, loser." Time seemed to stop. The room spun, and I had to steady myself against the wall. "You bitch gave our son away?" I whispered, the disbelief making it hard to breathe. How could you? How could you do that?" Jessica shrugged, utterly indifferent. "He didn't fit with what I wanted, David. I'm moving on. So should you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The woman I had married, the woman I had loved, had just casually told me that she'd thrown away our son, like he was nothing. And for what? For this smug bastard standing beside her, grinning like he'd won some sick game. Rage flooded my system, blinding and uncontrollable. "You're a monster," I growled, stepping toward her, my fists clenched at my sides. "I trusted you. I risked my life for you, for our family. And you did this?" She didn't flinch. In fact, she seemed almost amused. "Oh, come on, David. Don't be so dramatic. You'll get over it." Ryan stepped in, his chest puffed out as if he was challenging me. "Yeah, man, why don't you just walk away? It's over. She's mine now." I turned to face him, my vision narrowing to the point where all I could see was his smug face, the smirk still plastered there like a permanent scar. Every fiber of my being wanted to hit him, to knock that grin off his face, to make him feel the pain he was so casually causing. But I didn't. Instead, I looked back at Jessica, my voice shaking with barely controlled fury. "You're going to regret this. Both of you." Jessica rolled her eyes again, as if my anger was nothing more than an inconvenience. "Whatever, David. Just leave already." But I didn't leave. Not yet. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. Not after what they had done to Luke. Not after everything I had sacrificed. The betrayal burned in my chest, but beneath it was something stronger, determination. They thought they could take everything from me and walk away unscathed. They thought they could throw my son away like he was nothing. They were wrong. As I turned and walked out the door, I knew what I had to do. My revenge would be swift, and it would be absolute. They had no idea what was coming. The moment I stepped out of the house, the rage that had been simmering beneath the surface erupted. My hands clenched into fists, nails digging into my palms, so hard they almost drew blood. But I didn't turn back. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing how much their betrayal had broken me. Instead, I walked down the street, my mind racing with thoughts of revenge. "All right," I had said, voice steady but cold. "If this is how you want it." I had meant every word. Jessica and Ryan might have thought they had won, but they had no idea what was coming. I spent the next few days in a haze of anger and determination, piecing together everything I could about their lives while I was away. The first place I went was to a quiet motel across town. I needed a space where I could think, where I could plan without being interrupted. The room was small and bare, but it didn't matter. I wasn't here for comfort. I was here to dismantle their lives. The first order of business was figuring out who exactly Ryan was. He had to be more than just some muscle-bound guy Jessica had picked up. The way he had spoken to me, the arrogance, the casual disregard for everything I had worked for, made me suspect he was involved in something far worse than infidelity. I started digging, using every connection I had from my time in the military and every online tool I could access. It didn't take long to discover that Ryan wasn't just some random guy. He had a record, a long one: drug trafficking, money laundering, assault charges that had mysteriously disappeared. This guy was a criminal, and Jessica was right in the middle of it. But that wasn't the worst part. As I delved deeper into their lives, I found bank records, credit card statements, and even real estate transactions. They had been draining my accounts for months. They'd sold my car, liquidated assets, and spent my money like it was theirs. Lavish vacations, luxury items, things I had no idea about. While I had been halfway around the world, risking my life, they had been using me to fund their lifestyle. The betrayal was a knife in my gut, twisting deeper with every discovery. But what truly shattered me was Luke. My son, my flesh and blood, had been given up for adoption like he was an inconvenience. I spent hours and days calling every adoption agency, every foster care service I could find, desperate for a lead. Eventually, I found out that Jessica had signed over parental rights just weeks after I left. Ryan had convinced her that Luke was in the way of their new life together. She'd agreed without a second thought. I'd never felt such a deep, burning hatred in my life. They had taken everything from me, my family, my home, my future, and tossed it aside like garbage. But I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I knew I couldn't take them down with brute force. Ryan was dangerous, and Jessica had proven she was just as ruthless. I needed to be smarter, more calculated. I needed to dismantle their lives piece by piece, starting with Ryan. I spent days gathering evidence. Emails, financial records, anything that could link Ryan to his illegal dealings. I went through Jessica's social media, finding old posts that hinted at when their affair had started, linking the timeline to the money that had mysteriously disappeared from my accounts. Then I found the smoking gun, a series of messages between Ryan and one of his associates about a major drug deal. Dates, times, locations, it was all there. I printed everything, saved copies on multiple devices. This wasn't just personal revenge anymore. I had enough to destroy Ryan completely, and by extension, Jessica. But that wasn't enough. I wanted them to suffer, to feel the weight of their actions crashing down on them. I wanted them to lose everything the way I had. I contacted a lawyer. Even though they had sold off most of my assets, I still had some legal standing. I filed for divorce, citing adultery and financial exploitation. I froze what little was left of our shared accounts, ensuring they couldn't access another penny of my money. With the legal groundwork laid, I turned my focus to Luke. I hired a private investigator, someone who specialized in tracking down children in the foster system. It took weeks, but eventually he found a lead. Luke had been placed with a family a few towns over, safe and sound. Relief washed over me like a wave. At least my son was okay. But I wasn't done yet. The next step was the hardest. I had to confront Jessica and Ryan one last time, not to beg or plead, but to show them that their time was up. I needed them to see the storm that was coming for them. I waited until I knew they would be home together. Jessica had no idea what I had been up to. In her mind, I had slunk away like a beaten dog, defeated and broken. But when I showed up at the house, it was with a newfound confidence, a cold determination. The night was drenched in rain, cold and unforgiving, as I made my way to the luxurious penthouse. It was hard to believe that the money I'd spent years earning, fighting for, had gone into funding the lavish lifestyle Jessica and her lover had built behind my back. Tonight, it was all going to come crashing down, and I was ready. I stopped outside the building, taking a deep breath as I adjusted the collar of my jacket. My heart pounded in my chest, but it wasn't from fear, it was anticipation. The plan was set, the pieces in place. I was no longer the broken man who had stood on that doorstep weeks ago. I was in control now, and they were going to feel the weight of their betrayal. As I rode the elevator to the top floor, I rehearsed what I would say. It didn't matter if they tried to talk their way out of it. Words wouldn't save them. I stepped out onto the sleek hallway and walked up to the penthouse door. The sound of rain tapping against the large windows echoed through the corridor. I raised my fist and knocked. 3 sharp raps. A few moments passed before the door swung open. There stood Jessica, her face pale as her eyes widened in shock. "David," she gasped, gripping the door as if it could somehow shield her from what was coming. Her voice trembled, but there was no longer any power behind it. "What the hell are you doing here, David? Haven't you humiliated yourself enough?" I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I just wanted to drop by and let you know that it's over." I pushed past her without waiting for an invitation, stepping into the lavish living room that smelled of leather and expensive whiskey. The place was a far cry from the home we once shared, a mockery of the life we'd built together. In the middle of the room, lounging on the couch with a drink in hand, was her lover, Ryan, the same smug, shirtless man who had opened the door to me on that fateful day. He glanced up, his expression turning from surprise to a sneer as he set his glass down. "So, you came crawling back, huh?" Ryan muttered, his voice laced with arrogance. He stood up, towering over me, his eyes daring me to make a move. "You didn't learn your lesson the first time, did you?" I ignored him. Turning to Jessica, I said coldly, "I know everything. About the affair, the money you've been draining from my accounts, and most of all, about Luke." Jessica's eyes widened in horror. "David, she began, stepping forward with her hands outstretched as if to touch me, but I cut her off before she could spew her excuses. "It's exactly what I think," I continued, my voice rising with the storm brewing inside me. "You gave up our son, sold off everything we worked for. You think you can just walk away from that?" Ryan scoffed, crossing his arms. "What are you going to do about it, huh? You can't touch us?" That's when I smiled, a small, cold smile that wiped the smug look off his face. "Oh, I can do more than touch you," I said, reaching into my jacket pocket and pulling out a thick folder. I tossed it onto the coffee table in front of Ryan, the papers spilling out, bank records, photos, and transcripts of his illegal dealings. "I've already handed copies of this to the authorities." "You're finished." Ryan's bravado faltered as he picked up the papers. His face went pale as he flipped through them, his hands trembling slightly. Jessica moved beside him, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she glanced over his shoulder. "What is this?" Ryan snapped, his voice cracking. "You think you can ruin me with some pieces of paper? You won't be able to talk your way out of this," I said calmly. "Drug trafficking, money laundering, you've been sloppy. The evidence is all here, and the police are on their way. You'll be lucky if you don't spend the rest of your life in prison." The color drained from Jessica's face as reality started to set in. Her legs seemed to give out as she sank to the floor, tears streaming down her cheeks. "David, please," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But we can fix this. We can make it right. Please forgive me." I looked down at her, the woman I had once loved more than anything in the world, now reduced to a pathetic, weeping mess at my feet. Her tears did nothing for me. There was no sympathy left, no compassion, just emptiness. "Forgiveness?" I repeated, my voice filled with disdain. "You gave up our son like he was nothing. You chose this life, Jessica. You chose him." Jessica crawled forward, grasping at my pant leg as she pleaded, her words incoherent through her sobs. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't mean it." "You didn't mean for this to happen?" I scoffed. "You sold Luke. You sold our family for this." I gestured to the luxurious apartment, the man standing beside her, the life of lies and deceit she had built. "You're beyond saving, Jessica." Before she could respond, Ryan, who had been standing frozen, suddenly lunged at me in a burst of rage. "You son of a bitch," he yelled, his fist aimed at my face. But I was ready. I sidestepped him easily, letting his momentum carry him straight into the coffee table. The glass top shattered under his weight, shards flying everywhere as he groaned in pain. Jessica screamed, crawling backward as Ryan struggled to get up, blood trickling from a cut on his arm. I watched him for a moment, my heart cold. "You'll be lucky if that's the worst thing that happens to you tonight," I said, my voice low. "The police will be here any second." As if on cue, the sound of sirens filled the air, faint but growing louder. Ryan's eyes darted toward the broken window, panic flickering across his face. "You think you're going to get away with this?" He spat, his voice trembling as he tried to pull himself to his feet. "I'll make sure you pay for this." I leaned in, my voice barely above a whisper. "You're the one who's going to pay." Before he could respond, the front door burst open, and a group of police officers stormed in, their guns drawn. "Freeze!" one of them shouted, as they quickly surrounded Ryan and Jessica. Ryan raised his hands in surrender, his face twisted in fury and fear. Jessica sobbed uncontrollably, her hands covering her face as the officers moved to handcuff her. As they led them both away, Jessica turned to me one last time, her eyes filled with desperation. "David, please don't let them take me. I'll do anything. Please just give me one more chance." I met her gaze, and for a brief moment, I remembered the woman I had once loved, the woman I had risked my life to save. But that woman was long gone, replaced by the stranger in front of me. "There are no more chances," I said, my voice cold and final. "You made your choice. Now live with it." As the door closed behind them, the apartment fell into silence. The weight of everything that had happened hit me all at once, but I felt nothing. No relief, no satisfaction, just a hollow emptiness where my family had once been. But this wasn't the end. I still had one more thing to take care of. My baby Luke. It took weeks of paperwork, phone calls, and sleepless nights, but I finally tracked Luke down. The trail was long, complicated by the sheer amount of legal red tape that stood between me and my son. But I never once let up, not after everything that had happened. Luke was all I had left, and I was determined to bring him home. The moment I discovered where he was, I drove halfway across the state to find him. The foster family that had taken him in were kind people, quiet and gentle, the sort of folks who had given Luke some semblance of stability while his world fell apart. I'll never forget the conversation I had with them when I knocked on their door. A tall, middle-aged woman opened it, her eyes wary until I introduced myself. "I'm David," I said, the words catching in my throat. "I'm Luke's father." Her eyes softened, and she stepped back to let me inside. "We've been expecting you," she said quietly. Luke wasn't in the room at first, so I sat down in their modest living room, my hands nervously fidgeting with the fabric of the couch. "How is he?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "I need to know he's okay." The foster mother, Margaret, looked at me with a sympathetic smile. "He's doing well, considering everything. He's strong like his father, I suppose." I bit down on the flood of emotions rising inside me. There was so much I wanted to say, so much I wanted to apologize for. "I didn't know," I whispered. "I would never have let this happen if I'd known." Margaret nodded. "We understand. When the adoption agency brought him here, they explained what had happened. He's been waiting for you." And then, as if on cue, I heard footsteps. Luke appeared from behind the doorway, his eyes wide as he looked at me, standing awkwardly in the center of the room. My heart clenched at the sight of him. He was taller than I remembered, his hair a little longer, but those eyes, those were still the same. "My son." "Luke," I breathed, my voice barely audible. He blinked at me, his small face a mix of confusion and recognition. Then, without a word, he ran toward me, his arms outstretched. I dropped to my knees just in time to catch him, and he collided into me, his little body trembling against mine. "Dad," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Is it really you?" I hugged him tighter than I ever had before, burying my face in his hair as tears streamed down my cheeks. "It's me, buddy," I choked out. It's me. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. We stayed like that for what felt like forever, just the two of us holding on to each other like our lives depended on it. In that moment, all the pain, all the anger, all the betrayal, it all faded into the background. Nothing else mattered except that I had my son back. He was safe, and he was mine. Later that day, Margaret and her husband sat down with me to go over the logistics of bringing Luke home. They had grown fond of him, I could tell, but they knew it was time for him to be with his real family. "We've done what we can for him," Margaret said gently, her hand resting on my shoulder. "But he needs his father now." I nodded, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you for taking care of him." A week later, Luke and I were back home. Our house, our real home, felt emptier than before, but with Luke running around, filling the space with laughter and life again, it didn't take long for it to feel warm. The shadows of the past started to recede, replaced by the hope of a new beginning. Time passed, and with every day, the bond between Luke and me grew stronger. I could see the trauma of the last year slowly melting away as we built new memories together. We spent weekends at the park, playing catch, or at the beach, where Luke would collect seashells while I watched, content just to be near him. Every night, I tucked him into bed, reading him his favorite stories until he drifted off, his little hand always clutching mine until he fell asleep. It wasn't easy. There were still tough days where he would wake up crying, asking why his mother wasn't there, or nights when I couldn't sleep, haunted by the memories of what I had lost. But those moments were fewer and farther between as time went on. Then, one day, Sherry came into our lives. I met her through a mutual friend. At a barbecue I almost didn't attend. I hadn't been interested in dating again, not after everything that had happened with Jessica. My heart had hardened, and I wasn't ready to trust anyone. But there was something about Sherry that softened those edges. She was kind, patient, and most importantly, she had a way with Luke. From the moment they met, it was like they had known each other forever. Luke took to her quickly, laughing and playing with her like she was his best friend. I watched them together, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could have a real family again. Sherry and I started dating slowly, carefully. I was cautious, not wanting to rush into anything, but over time, she became a part of our lives. She was there for every milestone, every birthday, every scraped knee. And soon, it was clear that she wasn't just there for me. She was there for Luke too. One evening, after we had been together for nearly a year, I took her to the same beach where Luke and I had spent so many afternoons. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the waves. And as we stood there, I asked her to marry me. Tears welled up in her eyes as she smiled, and she said yes. It was the beginning of something beautiful, something real. Our wedding was small and intimate, just a handful of close friends and family. Luke was the best man, beaming with pride as he stood beside me. When I looked at him, I knew that everything I had fought for, everything I had endured, was worth it. This was our new beginning, our second chance at happiness. Sherry became the mother Luke had always deserved. She loved him as her own, and he loved her back with all his heart. Our house was no longer empty. It was full of laughter, warmth, and the kind of love that can only come from healing and forgiveness. As for Jessica and her lover, they rotted in jail, their lives completely destroyed by their own greed and selfishness. I followed their trial from a distance, watching as they were sentenced for their crimes. Every time I saw their faces on the news, I felt nothing but satisfaction. They had made their choices, and now they were paying the price. But as much as I had once longed for revenge, I realized that it didn't define me anymore. I had won. Luke and I had won. One evening, as I tucked Luke into bed, he looked up at me with sleepy eyes and whispered, "Dad, are we really okay now?" I smiled down at him, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "Yeah, buddy," I whispered. "We're okay. We're better than okay." And as I closed his bedroom door that night, I knew it was true. We had found our way back to each other, and we had built something stronger, something unbreakable. We had finally found our happily ever after. Months had passed since Jessica and her lover were sentenced to prison, and life had settled into a peaceful routine. Luke and I had moved into a small, cozy house on the outskirts of town. The neighborhood was quiet, filled with tall trees that whispered in the wind, and our new life here felt like a breath of fresh air. The past still lingered in the back of my mind, but it no longer weighed on me. There was a sense of contentment in the simplicity of our days, a peace that I had forgotten was possible. Luke was thriving. The boy who had been through so much was slowly finding his footing again. He had a room full of toys and books, and he spent his afternoons drawing pictures that he proudly displayed on the refrigerator. His laughter filled the house, bouncing off the walls as he played in the yard or showed off the latest drawings he had made. Each day, I saw a little more of the old Luke return, the bright, curious boy who was full of life. Then there was Sherry. Sherry had entered our lives unexpectedly, but it wasn't long before she became a part of us. When we first met, I wasn't looking for anything beyond friendship. I was still trying to heal from the betrayal of my past, and trusting someone new was the last thing on my mind. But Sherry was different. She was patient and kind, never asking for more than I was ready to give. Slowly, she became a fixture in our lives, her presence a calming force in the chaos that had once surrounded us. Luke adored her. He took to Sherry quickly, and it wasn't long before he was calling her by name and asking when she'd come over next. She wasn't just a replacement for what he had lost. She was something new, something better. She became the mother he had always deserved, nurturing and loving in a way that I could never have anticipated. One sunny afternoon, we found ourselves in the backyard. I was grilling burgers, while Sherry and Luke kicked a soccer ball back and forth across the yard. The smell of sizzling meat mingled with the earthy scent of grass and trees, and the warmth of the sun was a welcome reprieve from the cooler days that had preceded it. "Dad, look how fast I am," Luke called, darting after the ball with a mischievous grin on his face. Sherry laughed, pretending to miss the ball as Luke kicked it toward her. "You're too fast for me. I can't keep up," she teased, running after him with exaggerated effort. Luke's laughter rang out, bright and free, and I couldn't help but smile. This was what life was supposed to be like, simple moments of joy with the people who mattered most. I set down the spatula and jogged over to join them. "All right, who's ready to take on a real challenge?" I asked, grinning as I stretched my arms over my head. "You know I've got military training, right? You guys don't stand a chance." Luke's eyes lit up. "You're going down, Dad," he shouted, his excitement bubbling over. We kicked the ball back and forth, dodging and laughing as we played. The world outside our little bubble faded away, and all that mattered was this moment, the three of us together, happy and carefree. But peace has a way of being interrupted when you least expect it. At first, I didn't notice her. I was too caught up in the game, too focused on Luke's laughter and Sherry's playful competitiveness. It was Sherry who saw her first, standing just outside the gate, watching us with a look of disbelief mixed with something darker, jealousy, anger. Jessica. She was disheveled, her hair a mess, and her clothes mismatched and wrinkled. Her face was gaunt, and her eyes, once sharp and calculating, now seemed wild with desperation. I froze the moment I saw her, my body tensing as a wave of emotions hit me all at once. Jessica had been released on bail while awaiting her appeal, but the toll of her time in jail was already visible. Sherry stopped playing, sensing the shift in the air. She walked over to me, standing by my side, her hand instinctively reaching for mine. Luke, blissfully unaware, continued to kick the ball around, his laughter filling the tense silence. Jessica's eyes locked onto mine, a bitter smile twisting her lips. "So this is it," she called out, her voice thick with venom. "You think you can just replace me? Pretend like none of it ever happened?" I stepped forward, my voice steady despite the surge of anger that threatened to surface. "Jessica, you have no right to be here. You lost that right the moment you gave up Luke." Her face contorted with rage. "You think you're so much better than me?" she spat. "After everything we went through? You think you can just erase me like I never existed?" Sherry, always calm and composed, squeezed my hand gently before stepping forward. Her voice was soft but firm, carrying a weight that Jessica couldn't ignore. "This isn't about erasing anyone. This is about moving on. David and Luke deserve to be happy, and you made your choices. Now you need to live with them. Jessica's eyes darted between us, her fury barely contained. You'll never replace me, she screamed, her voice cracking with emotion. I was his wife. I was his everything. No, Jessica, I said, my voice cold. You were someone I loved once. But you threw that away. You threw away your family. And now I have a new life. A life that doesn't include you. For a moment, I thought she might break. Her eyes glistened with tears, her body trembling with barely contained rage. But then she clenched her fists, her face hardening as she took a step back. You'll regret this, David, she hissed. Both of you will. Without another word, she turned and stormed off, disappearing down the street. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, the tension slowly draining from my body. Sherry turned to me, her eyes full of concern. Are you all right? She asked quietly. I nodded, pulling her close. I'm fine now. I've got everything I need right here. At that moment, Luke came running over, oblivious to the confrontation that had just unfolded. Dad! Sherry! Come on, let's play again, he shouted, his face flushed with excitement. I smiled, ruffling his hair. You got it, buddy. As we resumed our game, I couldn't help but glance back toward the gate where Jessica had stood. She was gone now, but the shadows of her presence no longer haunted me. My life, my real life, was here, with Luke and Sherry. Whatever bitterness or anger Jessica carried with her was no longer my burden to bear. I had rebuilt my life brick by brick, and no one, least of all Jessica, could take that from me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was free. Free to be happy. Free to live. And that was all that mattered.